how I tricked my brain into thinking in English. Welcome to English 101, your space for powerful English listening practice. In today's episode, I'll share the story of how I completely changed the way I think by reprogramming my brain to think in English. Let's dive in and learn how you can do the same. Part 1. The Turning Point. When I realized my mind wasn't ready for English. There was a time in my English learning journey when I knew a lot of vocabulary, had memorized many grammar rules, and even practiced speaking now and then. But still, something felt missing. I was thinking in my native language and then translating everything into English in my head. It made my speech slow, unnatural, and sometimes completely blocked. I knew that fluent English speakers didn't translate in their heads. They just thought directly in English. That realization hit me hard and became a turning point. I began asking myself, is it even possible to change the way your brain works? Can I actually train my mind to think in English without translation? At first, it felt like a dream, something only children growing up in English-speaking countries could do. But I reminded myself that adults can rewire their brains too. Our minds are not fixed. They adapt. They grow. They respond to what we repeatedly feed them. So, I decided to test an experiment. What if I treated English not just as a subject to study, but as the actual language of my thoughts? I didn't need to move to an English-speaking country. I just needed to move my brain into English territory. The first thing I did was very simple. I picked 10 very common things around me, like my phone, my keys, my notebook, my chair, my shoes, and I gave them English names in my mind. Every time I looked at my shoes, I didn't allow the native word to appear in my brain. I forced myself to say, shoes. When I needed my notebook, I thought, where's my notebook? Instead of the word in my mother tongue. At first, it felt mechanical and slow. I had to fight my natural thinking. But after a few days, something magical began to happen. The words started coming faster. They started to feel automatic. That was my first proof that the brain can change, if you insist. Then I took it further. I began narrating my actions silently in English. When I woke up, I said to myself, okay, now I'm getting up. Let's make the bed. When I went to the kitchen, I thought, let's make some tea. It felt like I was talking to myself all day long, in English. And believe it or not, this changed everything. My brain started associating daily activities with English phrases. I no longer needed to stop and translate. The sentences just flowed in my mind. Not perfectly, of course, but naturally. And that natural flow gave me a kind of confidence I had never felt before. At this point, I realized that I discovered something powerful. It wasn't about studying more. It was about living more in English, inside my own head. I started watching short English videos, 2 or 3 minutes, every morning. But instead of just watching, I did something extra. I paused every 30 seconds, and I repeated aloud what the speaker had said. I wasn't just repeating like a parrot. I was training my mouth and brain to think like a native speaker. After 1 week of doing this every day, my thinking speed in English increased. I started forming faster responses when talking to friends online. I noticed I needed to translate less and less. But the biggest change came when I began keeping a daily English diary. Every night before bed, I opened a notebook and wrote a few sentences about my day. Only in English. I didn't worry about mistakes. I just wrote what I could, in the simplest way possible. And something surprising happened. My vocabulary started improving automatically. Not because I was memorizing, but because I was searching for ways to express real thoughts. That's what made the word stick. Real thoughts, not textbook examples. Around this time, I also changed the language of my phone and computer to English. It seemed like a small change, but it helped a lot. Every time I checked notifications, changed settings, opened an app, I was seeing and using English. My brain had fewer opportunities to fall back into my native language. It was like creating an English environment in the middle of a non-English country. It wasn't just physical, it was mental. One of the most helpful tricks I used was setting reminders in English. I used my phone to send myself motivational messages throughout the day. Keep going. Think in English. What are you doing now? Say it in English. These small reminders helped me stay on track. They brought me back to my goal whenever my mind wandered. Then came the audio trick. I downloaded a few English podcasts, short ones, and listened while walking or cleaning. But I wasn't just listening passively. I shadowed the speakers. That means I spoke at the same time as them, repeating what they said, almost like echoing. This exercise forced my brain to predict the next words and speak them out loud. It was difficult at first. I stumbled. I fell behind. I laughed at myself. But after a few sessions, I noticed my brain was getting faster. My pronunciation improved too, and I began to think in chunks of language instead of individual words. All of these methods work together like parts of a machine. Thinking in English wasn't one magical switch. It was the result of many small gears turning every day. Little by little, they changed the way my brain operated. English wasn't just something I learned anymore. It became something I used, something I lived, something I thought in. The translation wall was breaking down. I was no longer a student of English. I was becoming a user of English. And that made all the difference. Part 2. Building a mental world where English feels native. After several weeks of forcing my mind to interact with English on a daily basis, something inside me began to shift. I remember walking down the street and suddenly realizing that my internal dialogue, the voice inside my head, was using English without my conscious effort. I looked at a small shop and thought, I've never noticed that bakery before? Normally, I would have said that to myself in my native language. But this time, it just happened in English. That moment proved to me that my brain was adapting. It was responding to the environment I had deliberately created. I wasn't born bilingual, but I was becoming mentally bilingual. And all of it was happening in my own home, in my own country. I kept adding more small changes. For example, I began to label things in my room with sticky notes. My mirror had a note that said, mirror. The wall had one that said, wall. And my bookshelf had one that said, bookshelf. Every time I saw them, I read them. These small labels kept my brain immersed in English even during quiet moments. I wasn't only feeding my ears with English, I was feeding my eyes too. And it made a real difference. Whenever I reached for something, the English word came to mind first. That was the goal all along. For English to be the first language my brain reached for, at least in certain contexts. Another key change came when I started watching English content with English subtitles only, no translation. At first, it felt frustrating. I missed some phrases, got confused, and had to pause a lot. But slowly, my brain started catching up. It was forced to connect the sound with the text, and both with the meaning. That triangle, sound, spelling, and meaning, formed strong connections in my memory. I started hearing a word and instantly visualizing how it looked, not how it translated. That's when I began thinking in concepts instead of translations. The idea of door became a direct image in my mind, not a word in my native language that I had to convert. Then I added speaking practice with AI tools and chatbots. I would write something, the AI would reply, and I would try to speak my answer out loud before typing it. This exercise helped me become faster at forming sentences, especially in casual conversations. But more importantly, it trained my brain to anticipate common patterns in English. After all, conversation is just a set of patterns repeated over and over. Once I mastered a few dozen of those, I noticed how easily I could adapt them to different topics. The key was to repeat until the sentence patterns became automatic. To help me stay consistent, I made a weekly English routine. Mondays were for listening, Tuesdays for speaking, Wednesdays for reading, Thursdays for writing, and Fridays for reviewing vocabulary. I used weekends for reflection, looking back on my progress and updating my goals. Having this schedule gave my brain a sense of structure. It wasn't just random exposure, it was intentional training. Each day, I was reinforcing the mental pathway that connected my thoughts directly to the English language. A big breakthrough came when I started using affirmations in English. Every morning, I stood in front of the mirror and said things like, "I think clearly in English." I express myself with confidence. My brain loves English. It might sound silly, but these affirmations rewired my identity. I wasn't just practicing English anymore. I was becoming an English thinker. Our thoughts shape our reality. And if we want to speak like native speakers, we have to think like them too. One of the most powerful techniques I discovered was storytelling. Every day, I chose one small event and told a short story about it in English. I didn't worry about making it perfect. I focused on describing emotions, actions, and little details. For example, this morning I woke up late. The sun was already high, and the birds outside were loud. I felt guilty for missing my alarm, but I smiled anyway. It was a new day. This simple storytelling habit trained my brain to organize thoughts in English, using full sentences instead of broken fragments. I also made it a rule to avoid switching to my native language when I got stuck. If I didn't know a word in English, I tried to explain around it. For example, if I didn't know the word gloves, I might say, "Things you wear on your hands when it's cold." This forced my brain to stay in English and develop flexibility. Later, I could check the right word, but in the moment, I was training a valuable skill: survival fluency. That's what real communication is about. Not being perfect, but being resourceful. Music helped me a lot too. I chose slow English songs with clear pronunciation, printed the lyrics, and sang along every day. I treated it like pronunciation practice. Singing helped me remember sentence structures, rhythm, and intonation. It also made English feel more emotional, not just academic. When you feel the language, you remember it better. That's why emotional connection is so important in learning. It turns words into experiences. I even changed my inner monologue during problem solving. When I faced a difficult task or decision, I asked myself in English, "What should I do now? What's the next step? How can I fix this?" These moments of challenge became opportunities for English thinking. It made me stronger, not just as a language learner, but as a thinker. I realized that English wasn't just entering my brain, it was shaping how I approached life. All these little strategies built upon each other. None of them was dramatic on its own, but together, they created momentum. Day by day, my brain stopped resisting English and began embracing it. English was no longer a second language. It was becoming part of my mental operating system. That's when I knew. I had tricked my brain, not with lies, but with consistency and intention. I had created a reality where English wasn't foreign. It was familiar, not perfect, but natural. And that changed everything. Part 3. The daily triggers that made English my default language. Every language learner has moments of doubt, frustration, and exhaustion. I certainly did. There were days when I questioned everything, my ability, my methods, even my motivation. But those were the days when my system of daily triggers saved me. These weren't just habits. They were smart traps I'd set for myself, tiny cues scattered throughout my day that whispered, "Use English now." They didn't require willpower, just presence. And they kept me on track, even when my energy was low. One of the most powerful triggers was my alarm clock. I changed the label on my phone's morning alarm to an English phrase. Start the day in English. It was simple, but it worked. The moment I opened my eyes, I read English. I made a rule. The first thing I hear, read, or say in the morning must be in English. So I'd open an English podcast or play a YouTube video while brushing my teeth. That early exposure tuned my brain for the rest of the day. Like warming up before a workout, it reduced resistance later on. I also changed the names of my folders and apps on my laptop and phone. My Pictures folder became Memories. My Documents folder became My Writings. Even my calendar reminders were in English. Instead of doctor appointment, I wrote, Checkup with Doctor. Adams. These tiny changes made sure that I saw and interacted with English in ways that felt real. Not just as a school subject, but as the language of my digital world. My browser homepage was set to an English news site. This meant every time I opened Chrome or Firefox, I read an English headline. Even if I didn't read the article, I was exposed to vocabulary and sentence structures. Over time, these headlines helped me understand common collocations, especially in journalism. Officials respond. Public outrage. Economic recovery. It's a silent kind of learning. Effortless, yet powerful. In the kitchen, I labeled spices, utensils, and appliances in English. My salt container said salt, the sugar jar said sugar, and even the microwave had a note. Heat for 2 minutes. These labels turned cooking into a language lab. When I reached for something, I naturally rehearsed the English word in my mind. It sounds simple, but these repetitions created strong neural connections. My kitchen became an English immersion zone. While walking or commuting, I practiced mental narration. I would describe what I saw in English. That man is walking his dog. The sky looks cloudy today. I think the bus will be late. It didn't matter if I spoke out loud or silently. The goal was to keep my brain in English mode. Every journey became a vocabulary test and a creativity challenge. I was teaching my brain that thinking in English wasn't an exercise. It was a normal way of experiencing the world. Social media was another battlefield. Instead of endlessly scrolling in my native language, I followed English language creators who discussed topics I cared about: productivity, health, creativity, and personal development. I turned the algorithm into my teacher. Instagram and TikTok started feeding me English reels and short clips filled with natural expressions. I would pause, repeat the sentences, and sometimes even comment in English. It was interactive learning, not passive watching. Then came journaling. Each night, I wrote a short English entry in my diary, no more than 10 lines. I described my day, my feelings, what I learned, or what frustrated me. Over time, this habit helped me master the past tense, which is often tricky for learners. Writing sentences like, "Today, I felt nervous during the meeting, but later I relaxed," taught me how to naturally express timelines and emotions. And the best part? It helped me connect English to my personal life. I didn't try to learn difficult grammar rules from textbooks anymore. Instead, I noticed grammar while reading or listening. I'd come across a sentence like, "She has been working there for years," and I'd ask myself, why is it has been working instead of just works? That curiosity helped grammar become a tool, not a barrier. I learned through context, not memorization. Mistakes were no longer enemies. I stopped judging myself for them. In fact, I started collecting my most common mistakes in a notebook. For example, I often said, "he go," instead of "he goes." Once I wrote it down and practiced the corrected version multiple times, I rarely repeated it. This mistake journal became a map of progress, a record of lessons learned. I also learned to listen actively. Instead of just playing podcasts in the background, I started doing focused listening sessions. I'd pick one 5-minute podcast, listen to it 3 times, and take notes. First time, just listen. Second time, write key phrases. Third time, shadow the speaker, mimicking pronunciation. This triple play technique sharpened my listening, pronunciation, and memory all at once. During video calls or online conversations, I pushed myself to respond in full sentences. Instead of just saying yes or no, I said things like, "Yes, I completely agree with that idea," or "No, I haven't experienced that myself." These expansions made me sound more fluent and confident. Over time, they became my natural speaking rhythm. I even created mind maps of English topics. For example, around the word travel, I drew connections to passport, flight, adventure, hotel, customs, and so on. Seeing how words link together visually helped me remember them faster. My brain loves patterns and associations, and mind maps gave it both. When I was tired, I didn't stop learning. I just switched methods. If reading felt too heavy, I watched cartoons. If writing felt hard, I sang along to Disney songs. If I couldn't focus, I doodled English words on paper. The key was not to stop, but to adapt. Every tiny effort kept the English habit alive in my brain. And finally, I rewarded myself. Every Friday, I gave myself a treat, watching an English movie, baking something, or buying a small gift. I celebrated progress, even if it were small. This taught my brain to associate English with joy, not pressure. And that emotional reward system was the secret glue that held everything together. Part 4. Becoming the person who lives in English. Every day without thinking. When I look back on my journey, I realize something powerful. I didn't just change my study methods, I changed my identity. I became the kind of person who lives through English. That shift didn't happen overnight. It wasn't a sudden realization or a magical moment. It happened through hundreds of tiny steps. I stopped asking, "How can I learn English?" and started asking, "How can I live in English?" That mindset shift was everything. I began to think of English not as something external, but as something internal. Not something I had to reach for, but something already inside me. Every small choice reinforced this belief. When I chose to send a message in English instead of my native language, I wasn't just practicing. I was becoming a person who communicates in English. When I watched a movie without subtitles, I wasn't just improving my listening. I was choosing immersion over translation. These small decisions changed how I saw myself. I stopped introducing myself as someone learning English and started saying, "I'm an English speaker." This shift in identity gave me confidence. Even when I made mistakes, I didn't feel like a failure. I felt like a speaker refining their style. Language wasn't a test, it was a journey. I gave myself the right to speak imperfectly, because that's how all speakers grow. I realized that thinking in English didn't mean translating every word. It meant understanding concepts in English. For example, when I heard the word library, I no longer thought of the translation in my native language. I thought of quiet spaces, books, the smell of paper, and studying. The word carried meaning, not just sound. This was a major milestone. It meant I was no longer translating. I was connecting directly. I also noticed something strange but beautiful. English started to appear in my dreams. I began dreaming in English conversations, hearing voices speaking fluently, sometimes even correcting myself mid-dream. At first, it was weird. But soon, I realized, it meant my brain had truly started to accept English as part of my internal world. It was no longer a foreign language. It was mine. To strengthen this transformation, I created rituals. Every Sunday night, I would plan my week in English, writing down goals, tasks, and even affirmations like, "I will express myself clearly," or "English is easy for me now." These mental routines shaped my self-image. I wasn't just learning English anymore. I was shaping my mindset. Music played a special role, too. I started learning the lyrics to songs I loved and singing them aloud. This helped with rhythm, intonation, and emotion. Singing connected me to the feeling of English. Sometimes, I cried when singing a song that deeply resonated with my struggles or hopes. It made English not just a skill, but a language of emotion. Another powerful moment came when I started to help others. I joined online forums and answered questions from beginners. Teaching someone else forced me to think clearly, express myself simply, and review my knowledge. It also gave me a sense of purpose. I wasn't just learning English for myself. I was becoming part of a global community. There were setbacks too. Days when I couldn't focus. Days when I doubted if it was worth it. But every time, I reminded myself why I started. I remembered how confused and frustrated I used to feel. I remembered the first time I understood a full English video, or made a native speaker laugh, or read a full novel without a dictionary. These memories pushed me forward. Eventually, I reached a place where English wasn't something I scheduled. It was just how I lived. If I wanted to learn something new, I looked it up in English. If I needed entertainment, I watched English shows. If I had thoughts to write down, they came out in English. This wasn't because I forced it. It was because it had become natural. My brain chose English. I also learned that perfection is the enemy of progress. Waiting to speak perfectly only delays fluency. I embraced the beauty of good enough. I let my mistakes be loud, visible, and frequent, because each one taught me more than 100 silent lessons. Language is messy, and that's okay. In the end, what really made the difference was consistency, not intensity. I didn't study for 10 hours a day. I just showed up every day. 5 minutes of speaking, 10 minutes of listening, 15 minutes of writing. It added up. Like drops of water filling a jar, my small efforts overflowed into fluency. If you're reading this or listening now, I want you to know you're already on the right path. The fact that you're exposing yourself to English, trying to understand, trying to grow, it means you've already started becoming the person who speaks English. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for perfection. Just keep going. Make English part of your identity. Let it into your routines, your devices, your thoughts. Build tiny habits. Create small wins. Celebrate progress. And most importantly, never forget that this is possible for you. If I did it, so can you. Your brain can be your biggest ally. Treat it with kindness. Feed it English. Play with the language. Be curious. Be bold. And let the English version of you grow, bit by bit, word by word, until one day you look in the mirror and realize, I don't think in English. I am English now. That day is closer than you think. Keep going. You're doing better than you know. Thanks for listening to this episode of English 101. If this story inspired you or helped you understand more English, give this video a like and share it with a friend. Subscribe to the channel for more listening practice and real English stories every week. And remember, the more you live in English, the more fluent you become. See you in the next episode.